All right, and we are live.
All righty, everybody. Thank you so much. We are live. Welcome to the January 30th meeting of the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. We will go around the room, go around the table and introduce ourselves. Then we always ask our guests to briefly introduce themselves and let us know who they're here representing today. And then we are going to turn the table over to our esteemed ledge counsel, Ellen, and you can introduce yourself for the record. And we are here today. We've been systematically trying to walk through some of the actual key statutes that have been passed in recent years. So we have already walked through the Clean Heat Standard at our joint hearing. We walked through the Global Warming Solutions Act, and we're here today to walk through the Renewable Energy Standard. And we have until 10:30. I'm trying to get a little bit more systematic about taking a 15-minute break between testimony. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Representative Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Garrett Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleppner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Laura Spillier, Wyndham 2.
Peter Sterling, Rev.
Gabrielle Molina, Downs Rackland Martin, Government Affairs.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
I'm Matt Sorensen, student intern from UVM.
And who do you intern for?
Or Representative Lisa Hengel, Franklin.
Oh, that's right. You said that earlier. But we have to do it all over again every time.
I'm Katie Irby. I'm also student intern, and I'm representing Janet Brown and Aaron Brady.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. For the record.
Ellen Czerkowski, Office of Legislative Counsel. So today I'm going to give you an overview of the Renewable Energy Standard, including the updates that the legislature made last year in Act 197. Nope, 179. Yep. So today posted on your website is the PowerPoint slides I'm going to go over, as well as the text of Act 179. Act 179 made updates to the Renewable Energy Standard. It also made updates to a couple other associated programs, including the reporting on the Renewable Energy Standard, which I'm not gonna touch on, I don't think, in the next 26 minutes or so. So it's there and we can talk about it. Also, you definitely should hear from the agencies at some point on the details of how the program operates totally, including REC prices and how REC prices fluctuate. I'm not gonna spend time talking about that today, just the statute.
We are getting into that a little bit, I think, with the Department of Public Service next week. And maybe you're going to say this, Ellen, but the last year's bill updated the underlying pre-existing renewable energy standard, which has been in statute since when? I couldn't remember.
It was passed in 2015.
2015. Okay.
And it went into effect in 2017. So, yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit.
Great.
So, Renewable Energy Standard. The text of this is in 30 VSA Chapter 189, the Renewable Energy chapter. And I have the specific text of some of the slides referencing where the specific provisions are. So, first is 8004. There's a lot of text on this slide. This is the introductory section to the RES, and it has sort of the high points of first in A, establishing there is a renewable energy standard required, and under this program, retail electricity providers shall not sell electricity within the state without ownership of sufficient energy produced by renewable energy plants or sufficient RECs, or a combination of both to cover their required amounts as set forth in the next section. So they can have a combination of ownership over plants, the RECs from other plants, or a mixture of both to cover the required amounts that are in the tiers. So you probably have heard that this is a tiered system, but the basic premise is that a retail electricity provider has to cover the required renewable energy requirements under this chapter based on the amount of electricity that they sell in the state. It gives the PUC the authority to adopt rules to update additional details of this statute. It allows for RECs, renewable energy credits, to be banked if they have additional credits above what they need. We can talk more about that a little bit. It also establishes an alternative compliance payment, which is those that, for anyone that misses their required amounts each year, they can pay a fee. That fee then goes into the Clean Energy Development Fund, and it goes towards funding renewable energy projects. There was a specific update last year that said for tiers 1, 2, 4, and 5, an alternative compliance payment would go towards a project in the utilities service territory if feasible. So that if a utility had to pay this fee, it would go towards projects in their own area. There's a provision that allows the VIPSA members, I'll talk about this more in a minute, to aggregate to meet the requirements of this chapter, and it does allow the other utilities to engage in joint efforts also. So let's take a step back, because I know that was that was a little bit of an overload. I'm going to go into details of all of that now.
Can you just tell me what VIPSA is?
I will in a moment.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
But I can tell you now.
Good time.
So VIPSA is the Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. It is a union of 11 municipal utilities. I'll talk more about that on the next slide, but it is the group by which 11 utilities have joined together. The smallest utilities have joined together just to sort of be able to advocate for themselves, but also to discuss additional issues. Are they coming in?
They came in.
Oh,
Ken Nolan.
that's
Amen.
Ken.
So we have testimony from Ken on the website.
Okay.
It's a lot. It is a lot. And the acronyms are a lot.
And I'm going to talk more about it on the next page. So that was the summary that's in 8004, but here are more of the details. So 8002 is the definition section. There are a lot of definitions related to all this, but the ones that are relevant, especially for this introductory part, is renewable energy. So renewable energy is required from each of the utilities, and renewable energy is defined. It has the basic definition of technology that uses fuel that is consumed at a rate below the natural regeneration rate. So a source that is not fully depleted when it's used for fuel, such as the sun or wind, as opposed to a fossil fuel that once you use that fuel, it takes hundreds of thousands of years to regenerate. So that's what we're talking about. There are some additional definitions and clarifications in this definition 21. So for purposes of this definition, methane gas and other gases produced by the decay of sewage at sewage treatment plants or landfills, and anaerobic digestion from agricultural products, those are renewable energy sources, but no other form of solid waste other than silvicultural waste, which would be biomass, which is considered renewable. So no energy from solid waste is considered renewable. And then the big one, no form of nuclear fuel is considered renewable under this statute. So we're talking about renewable, which is the things I think you think of classically: solar, wind, water. Then we have also these gases produced by other processes, but nuclear is not included. And biomass, fuel generated by the burning of biomass, is considered renewable. So then, renewable energy is divided into two categories of existing renewable energy and new renewable energy. And that's because two of the tiers require that the energy that count under that tier be new renewable energy. And the dividing date here is January 1, 2010. If it's constructed after January 1, 2010, that makes it new. Prior to that, it's existing or old renewable energy. This is one of the things that changed under last year's bill. Previously, it had been 2015, but last year's bill did backdate it to 2010. There was another caveat added in last year's bill as well. So the definition of new renewable energy also excludes energy generated by a large hydroelectric plant, so capacity of 200 megawatts or greater. This means that hydroelectric energy does still count as renewable energy, but it can't be counted as new renewable energy. So then, also, you have heard me use the phrase retail electricity provider or provider. These are the electric distribution utilities. So this is a specific definition for this chapter, but we're talking about the electric utilities. We're not talking about Velco, the transmission utility. We're talking about the distribution utilities that sell electricity to your homes and businesses. So there are 18 of them. You have started hearing from them. I don't know how many you've gotten through, but there are 18 of them. And here is the list because, and it's important to keep this list in mind because the new updates to the RES last year, the tier requirements are based on what type of utility you are. So first we have an investor-owned utility, that's Green Mountain Power. That's the largest utility. They have more than 75,000 customers. There are 2 electric co-ops, the Vermont Electric Co-op and Washington Electric Co-op. There are 14 municipal utilities. There are members of VIPSA that have joined together as part of this, and there are 11 of them. So 11 of the municipalities have gotten together and participate in VIPSA. Good. And then there are 3 others: Stowe Electric Department, Burlington Electric Department, and then the Village of Hyde Park Electric Department. They are municipal utilities, but they are not members of VIPSA.
And so just for committee orientation, if you want to go back, we're doing pretty well. We've heard from Green Mountain Power. We have heard from our 2 co-ops. We heard from VIPSA. We have heard from Burlington Electric, and Global Foundries is coming in today. So we are just, you can go back. That testimony has been delivered, but it's a lot. So thanks. I just wanted to let you know, Ellen, we're plowing through.
So there's one other utility. It's the newest utility. A couple years ago, Global Foundries asked the PUC to be recognized as a utility, and so they are a utility that has a single customer that takes service at 150 kilovolts. And that is how they are recognized in this statute. When you see that phrase, we're talking about Global Foundries. They have a unique structure, and Act 179 established clearly what the requirements for them are under the renewable energy standard moving forward. So can I do a time check real quick? Did you say I have until 10:30?
Is that what I said?
I think that's probably fine because you should hear from the agencies, but also I do have five tiers to get through.
Okay, let's move along. I will stop interrupting, for example.
Happy to have questions. There will be people who know more about this than I do, the people who actually do this day to day. So the requirements to have renewable energy are organized in what we call tiers. The first one is tier 1, that's total renewable energy, and it's asking the utility to look at the total annual load, so all of the energy in their portfolio, and they have to have a percentage of that coming from renewable energy. And so the types of energy that qualify for this category are any renewable energy that can be delivered into New England, regardless of when it was constructed. So any size, any date, as long as it's capable of delivery into New England, which does include New York and Canada. So things that are like directly adjacent to our grid count. And so starting in 2025, which builds on the prior existing requirement that they've already been complying with, 63% of their annual load, each utility's annual load, has to come from renewable energy. That is increasing at least 4% every 3 years. And then there is a distinction based on the type of utility you are, but it's increasing every 4 years to reach 100% renewable for the whole load. And so for Global Foundries and the municipal electricity providers, it's 100% by 2035. And for all the other utilities, it's 100% by 2030. I will note that 3 of the utilities are already 100% renewable. It's Burlington Electric Department, Washington Electric Co-op, and Swanton are already 100% renewable. So tier 1, total energy, everything counts towards this. Tier 2 is more specific. Tier 2 is distributed generation. So this is, I think of this as new, small, local. It's more specific than the total, but it all feeds into the total. So there's a purpose statement for this, which is that when you locate smaller resources closer to where they're used, it reduces line losses and it supports the reliability for the electric system. But so to meet this requirement, it has to be new, so constructed after January 1, 2010, has to be capable of being connected to the distribution system, it has to be less than 5 megawatts. And this is typically met through net metering or the standard offer program or each individual utility's power purchase agreements. Last year's bill also did add a sort of caveat to this, which was additionally, there are some resources that the utilities owned that are hydroelectric plants that are not new, but as long as they were owned by the utilities by 2024, they can also count for this category. So that is new in this year's bill and last year's law. So the required amounts here, starting in 2025, it picks up where you left off in the prior year, which is at 5.8% of the total load has to come from these distributed generation sources. And again, there's a distinction between the type of utility you are. So for global foundries and the municipalities, it's increasing 1.5% each year until reaching 20% in 2035. And for the other utilities, it's increasing 2% each year until reaching 20% in 2032. Additionally, there's a few provisions that are specific to global foundries. So global foundries has the ability to use extra tier 4 credits to count for tier 2. Tier 4 credits are new generation, regardless of size. And so there may be constraints specific to global foundries that would preclude them from having distributed generation sources. And so they can ask the PUC if they can use excess tier 4 credits to meet tier 2. I'm going fast and there's a lot of information here, but you will hear more about this in the coming weeks, I'm sure. Tier 3 is different from the other categories because this is about energy transformation. So it is not specifically just limited to electrification. It's not specifically limited to renewable energy. It's about fossil fuel reductions for utility customers. So to be eligible for these, to meet this category, the utilities can do electrification projects, including incentivizing electric vehicles, heat pumps, electrifying sawmills or electrifying sugaring operations, or doing weatherization projects. Things that reduce the fossil fuel usage of their utility customers can count for tier 3 credits. And there's a formula that the agencies use to calculate how these projects reduce greenhouse gas emissions and translate into credits for this. They also can use any extra tier 2 credits they have. So they have excess net metering credits, they can put that towards their tier 3 requirements. So for 2025, there was only minor changes made to this in last year's bill. It's starting with 7.33% and increasing 0.2% each year until reaching 12% in 2032. And that overall percentage did not change in last year's bill. Additionally, the municipal electric utilities that have less than 7,000 customers, so the smallest ones, they have a slightly different target. It's 6% increasing to 10.23% in 2032, and that didn't change in last year's bill. So then the bill did create 2 new categories, 2 new tiers. They probably are, they're sort of the same take on this, they're a different take on the same issue, which is what happens when there's 100% renewable. So first, tier 4 is asking for additional new renewable energy sources. So this is any size project that is new, so after 2010, capable of delivery in New England. And so for the 3 utilities, so the required amounts under this category really do depend on what type of utility you are. So for the 3 that are already 100% renewable, they're exempt from this requirement. But for Green Mountain Power, they have a requirement of 4% of their annual load coming from new renewables, starting in 2027, going to 10% in 2030, 15% in 2032, and 20% in 2035. For the rest of the utilities, It's 5% required in 2030 and 10% in 2035. And then related to this is tier 5, which is the load growth tier. So this is what happens after all the utilities have met, or when a utility has reached 100%, what happens? So for the 3 utilities that are already 100% renewable, they have to meet the load growth above their 2024 baseline with new renewables. And so the point here is to start getting them to transition from, most of them have a long history of contracts with existing renewable sources that may not be new renewable. They may have been around for a long time. And so this is to get them to gradually shift towards including more renewables in their portfolio because they already have 100% renewable. And so this is an interesting schedule for the 3 100% renewables. They need to have 50% of their load growth come from renewable in 2025, 75% in 2026, 90% in 2027, 100% in 2028, until their annual load exceeds 135%. And then it will be at least 50% until 2035. Then it's 75% after 2035. You may want to hear why that was what they decided to go on, but the utilities agreed to this provision, so they must have a sense of what they're able to purchase in that time frame.
Not to speak for the utilities, but as the person who worked to kind of bring about that customized agreement with multiple parties all the way around the table, it was important to find custom solutions for each one of the utilities because they're all different sizes, they all have different rates, they all have different contracts, they're all in different places, and we had a renewable energy working group that was meeting throughout the summer and fall that was working in parallel with the Department of Public Service, and that there was consensus in that working group that it was really important to treat our utilities, if possible, with customizable or customized plans. So for instance, Global Foundries, which we will hear from later today, is a very different utility than Green Mountain Power. And so we want to make general progress. So how do we, applying the same standard to each utility in the same way may have created undue costs.
Yeah, and on that, this is my last bullet point. So for the utilities that are not yet 100% renewable, they'll have met their 100% renewable after 2035. And so for GMP and the VIPSA members, they have to meet this load growth requirement with 100% renewable energy after, for their load growth after 2035. That growth has to be covered with 100% renewable moving forward. I do want to just flag on that point, which is that if you add up the utilities on this slide, we only get to 14, 11, 12, 13, 14. We only get to 14 out of 18. So there are 4 utilities that are not addressed under this tier that you may want to think about. And this tier really doesn't kick in for most of them until 2035. So at some point you may want to consider if you want to address the other 4 utilities. And that's the end of the slides. That is a very quick, high-level version of what the Renewable Energy Standard requires.
It's the fastest I've ever seen.
I know.
We got that right in the quiz.
That's great. Yeah.
Where do we see what the various utilities, where they are in this progression? Is there like a public spreadsheet somewhere on the PUC's website or someone's where you can see GMP, for instance, is at this number for this tier?
All of the utilities are, as of last year, were in compliance with the required amounts for each year, as far as I'm aware. There's only been one instance of a utility needing to pay the alternative compliance payment, which is the penalty of where they're not meeting it, and it was a very small amount, and it was sort of a rounding error. And so as far as the amount of, they are all complying, and they have been. as far as like what resources they're using to meet it, yes, the PUC and the Department of Public Service track all this information, and that is why you should hear from them. They also are tracking the prices that they're all paying, for, or what the rate, what the rec rates are, so what they're paying on average to comply with each tier. So they, the department definitely has that information, because the PUC does too, but I do not.
So maybe you don't have to answer, but have there been alternative appliance payments in the past? And
Just one.
Just one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was like a rounding error.
That's the only one?
That's the only one.
In the history of RES?
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions on the statute?
Do you
Oh my
want us to
gosh.
add another tier?
All right.
Oh my God.
Last year,
No.
Yeah.
I just been joking about all of my tiers.
Uh,
You wanna know why? Because I
All my
also
tiers.
wite about the Act 250 stuff, which is
Yeah.
also now in tiers. And so if you wanted to change the name of this,
Adding tiers is better.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. Well, we're right on time. So,
Thank you.
thank you. I think I'm finding these statute walkthroughs to be helpful, so appreciate you coming. We can go off live. I think we have a 15-minute break.